Q&A Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @Q&A Review, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@qnreview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the National on Friday the 19th of April 2024 from the Culture section. Giant lizard specimen to be repatriated from Scotland to Jamaica. This article is written by Ross Hunter. A 170-year-old lizard specimen is to be returned to its Jamaican homeland from a Scottish university collection as part of a reparatory justice move. The Jamaican giant gallywasp, a species now presumed extinct, is thought to have been collected in the 1850s and became part of the University of Glasgow collections in 1888. A joint team from the University of the West Indies and the Institute of Jamaica will now travel to Glasgow to retrieve the specimen in what is said to be the first repatriation of a natural history specimen in the Caribbean. It comes following a 2019 Memorandum of Understanding between the UWI and the University of Glasgow, which aims to foster collaboration in research and education and address the historical legacies of colonialism. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice-Chancellor of the UWI, said, "The reparatory justice movement deals with various issues of different scales that must be addressed. By returning the gallywasp to its rightful place, we take a small but significant step towards laying the foundation for a regional and international discussion on repatriation." Giant Jamaican gallywasps were last confirmed alive in the 1800s, but the species is now considered to be extinct. Their disappearance was due to the sugarcane plantation economy, which led to a loss of natural habitat and introduced predators such as rats to the island. The specimen at the University of Glasgow's Hunterian Museum entered the university's collections in 1888, following the transfer of ethnographical and zoological specimens from another Glasgow collection, the Andersonian Museum. That article was written by Ross Hunter. This is from the National on Friday the 19th of April 2024 from the News section. Former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell charged with embezzlement. This article is written by Ross Hunter. The former Chief Executive of the SNP, Peter Murrell, has been charged in connection with the embezzlement of funds from the Scottish National Party. After being rearrested on Thursday morning, Police Scotland later confirmed that the 59-year-old Murrell had been charged. It said, "A 59-year-old man has today, Thursday the 18th of April 2024, been charged in connection with the embezzlement of funds from the Scottish National Party. The man, who was arrested at 9:13 a.m. today and had previously been arrested as a suspect on the 5th of April 2023, was charged at 6:35 p.m. after further questioning by Police Scotland detectives investigating the funding and finances of the party. A report will be sent to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in due course. The man is no longer in police custody. The matter is active for the purposes of the Contempt of Court Act 1981, and the public are therefore advised to exercise caution if discussing it on social media. Murrell, who is the husband of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, was arrested last April as part of Police Scotland's probe into the party's finances. Police Scotland officers searched the couple's home near Glasgow and also arrested Sturgeon and former SNP Treasurer Colin Beattie, before releasing all three without charge pending further investigation. The arrests were made in relation to Operation Branchform, an investigation into the use of £600,000 of donations made to the Party for Independence campaigning. An SNP spokesperson said, "While this development will come as a shock, the police investigation remains ongoing and it would, therefore, be inappropriate to make any comment." The party added that Murrell had resigned his membership. A spokesperson for the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, COPFS, said, "Senior professional prosecutors from COPFS and an advocate depute are working with police on this ongoing investigation. It is standard practice that any case regarding politicians is dealt with by prosecutors without the involvement of the Lord Advocate or Solicitor General. All Scotland's prosecutors act independently of political interference. As is routine, to protect the integrity of ongoing investigations, we do not comment in detail on their conduct." That article was written by Ross Hunter. This is from The National on Friday the 19th of April 2024, from the news section. Humza Yousaf urges current and future PMs to compensate WASPy women. This article is written by Lucy Jackson. First Minister Humza Yousaf has urged Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer to be on the right side of history in delivering compensation for women impacted by changes to the state pension age. Yousaf has written to who he said are the current and future incumbents of Downing Street, after he met with the Women Against State Pension Inequality (WASPy) movement outside the Scottish Parliament. It follows the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman (PHSO) report, which ruled some women born in the 1950s were not adequately informed of the impact of the changes. For more than 60 years, men received their state pension at 65, while the threshold was 60 for women, despite concerns the move was unfair due to the longer life expectancy of women. Moves to equalise the issue began with the 1995 Pension Act, with the age for women increasing to 65 between 2010 and 2020. But it was accelerated in 2010 to reduce the overall costs of pensions, with the new state pension age brought forward to 2018. However, the Ombudsman report ruled accurate and timely information had not been given to millions of women in the UK, including 335,000 in Scotland. Following a demonstration outside Holyrood on Thursday, the First Minister said, "Westminster's continued refusal to provide compensation to women affected by this national scandal for years has been a shocking dereliction of duty. It is abundantly clear that after years of inaction, WASPy women must get the justice, apology and compensation they deserve. I urge both the current and future occupants of 10 Downing Street to be on the right side of history, and am willing to work with both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer to ensure that the historic injustices faced by the WASPy women is now urgently put right." In his letter to Prime Minister Mr Sunak, Mr Yousaf said the UK government must become part of the solution rather than the problem for campaigners. He also urged Labour leader Sir Keir to stand by the party's previous manifesto pledge to recognise the injustice and design a compensation system. The PHSO suggested a compensation level of between £1,000 and £2,950 for impacted women. But Anne Potter, coordinator of WASPI Glasgow, Lanarkshire, Dumbartonshire and Renfrewshire, said the sum did not reflect the injustice the women had experienced. She said, "Whilst I am thankful that the long-awaited Ombudsman report has been published and that it has shown without doubt that we experienced maladministration at the hands of the UK government, I am extremely disappointed in the suggested level of compensation. Politicians from every party must show support for the campaign and ensure the UK government deals with this efficiently and effectively." That article was written by Lucy Jackson. This is from The National on Friday the 19th of April 2024 from the news section. Scotland to get all modes of public transport ticket system. This article is written by Hamish Morrison. The Scottish Government has announced it wants to introduce a new Transport for London-style integrated ticket system for public transport. Energy Secretary Mari McCallan said this would be explored as part of a new strategy to reduce car journeys by 20%, as she confirmed reports that the government was ditching a key climate target. She told MSPs the government was scrapping its ambition to reduce carbon emissions by 75% before the end of the decade. The Scottish Government has also said it will move away from legally binding annual targets, which it has missed for 8 out of 12 years. But McCallan also unveiled a package of new green measures she said would help Scotland cut its carbon emissions. She said the Scottish Government wanted to bring in a new public transport ticket system, which would allow passengers to use one ticket for any journey made using buses or trains, similar to that run in London, some major European cities and Northern Ireland. It is not the first time this idea has been floated. Then Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced a trial of integrated ticketing in 2012, which never took off. In 2021, Transport Scotland received the findings of a consultation carried out by the National Smart Ticketing Advisory Board. McCallan admitted she was disappointed with the 2030 carbon reduction target had been scrapped, but said she accepted it was out of reach. She told MSPs, "We must now act to chart a course to 2045 at a pace and scale that is feasible, fair and just." Promising pilot projects to reduce emissions from agriculture and accelerate peatland restoration, McCallan insisted there was no doubt about the seriousness with which this government treats the climate and nature crisis. However, she said the severe budgetary restrictions imposed by the UK government and the continuing constraints of devolution meant that the Scottish Government was trying to deliver societal and economic transformation with one hand tied behind our back. And, she warned, full delivery of the Scottish Government's plans would depend on Westminster reversing the 9% cut to our capital budget. McCallan insisted this government and Parliament rightly has high ambitions, and it is beyond doubt that investing now in net zero is the right thing for our environment, our society and our economy. But we are being held back. So I am asking MSPs across this chamber to work with us to call on the UK government to reverse Scotland's capital cut. Stephanie O'Gorman, a member of the Scottish Government's Climate Emergency Response Group, savaged ministers for ditching the target, saying the government cannot be forgiven for not taking every opportunity to proactively work towards its ambitions. She added, Simply pointing the finger at Westminster as a default position will not move the dial on Scotland's climate progress. Peter Kelly, director of the Poverty Alliance charity, warned, "Today's announcement will undermine trust in the Scottish Government." Jamie Livingstone, head of Oxfam Scotland, said, "The Scottish Government's abandonment of its legal 2030 and annual emissions reduction targets is a reprehensible retreat caused by its recklessly inadequate level of action to date." He called on MSPs to find the cash to fund new climate pledges, saying without money they would amount to little more than hot air. But the Scottish Greens have defended the government, saying the new package of climate measures, which include bringing in 24,000 new electric vehicle charge points, subjecting farms to carbon audits, and consulting on a new carbon tax for large estates, saw a shift from targets to action. McCallan was given a ticking off by the presiding officer before beginning her statement after the key announcement about carbon targets was leaked to the media. The minister has said a leak investigation will be carried out by top civil servant John Paul Marks. That article was written by Hamish Morrison. This is from The National on Friday the 19th of April 2024, from the news section. Tory MP calls for minister and legislation to protect Union flag. This article is written by Joe Sullivan. A second Tory MP has called for a minister for flags and said the Union Jack should be protected by legislation. Tory MP Andrew Rosindell made the call in the Commons just weeks after his Conservative colleague Henry Smith, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group APPG on flags and heraldry, suggested that the UK government should appoint a minister for flags. Rosindell went one step further, telling MPs that the Union flag should be protected by legislation. He said in the Commons on Thursday, "I think many people will be quite angered by the way certain national organisations have tried to change our national flags, the Cross of St George and the Union Jack. Isn't it time that we protected and cherished our national symbols by appointing a Minister of the Crown to oversee this from the Cabinet Office? And will he also look at the Union Flag Bill of 2008, which enshrines in legislation the protection of our cherished national flag?" Culture Minister Stuart Andrew replied, "The Union Jack should be a unifying symbol for the whole country, and it has looked the way it has for the last several hundred years, and I see no point in messing around with it. I'm not sure that we need legislation. I think we just need some common sense." Rosindell also requested that a public holiday be held to celebrate St George's Day, the feast day of England's patron saint, to have one great celebration for our country. In 2008, he introduced the Union Flag Bill, which called for the Union flag to become the official national flag of the United Kingdom. The bill, which did not become law, also encouraged public buildings to fly the flag. The suggestion in the Commons comes after Nike introduced a playful update to England's national flag for the country's 2024 Euros kit. Conservative and Labour figures both voiced backlash to the change, which saw purple and blue stripes added to the cross on the flag. Commons leader Penny Mordaunt said later in the sitting that preserving the England flag is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. The comments came in response to criticism of her social media posts on Nike's flag update from SNP Commons leader Deirdre Brock. That article was written by Joe Sullivan.
This is from The National on Monday, 22nd April 2024. From the Politics section. Keir Starmer. Labour are true party of English patriotism. By Ross Hunter. Keir Starmer has claimed that Labour are the true party of English patriotism and said he has no time for those who flinch at the displaying of the St George's Cross. In an article for The Telegraph, the Labour leader said the Tories had lost the right to call themselves patriotic. He said, "The question is this Conservative Party really capable of serving anything other than itself? I don't think so. In fact, frankly, when you've trashed the economy, hammered mortgage holders, weakened the union, neglected our forces, repeatedly broken laws you expected others to follow, and denigrated some of our proudest national institutions, from the BBC to the National Trust and England football team, I'm afraid you have lost any right to call yourselves a patriotic party." In a bid to one-up the Tories in showing appreciation for the English flag, Starmer vowed to celebrate St George's Day with enthusiasm and criticised associating the use of the St George's Cross with right-wing insular politics. "We are committed to putting our patriotic values into practice," he said. "More and better homes for hard-working people, access to art, sport and music for every child, devolving power to local communities, supporting aspiration and championing the British hope that if you work hard, anyone can do well in life. That is why I have no time for those who flinch at displaying our flag. Because the cross of St George belongs to every person who loves this country and seeks to make it better, a symbol of pride, belonging and inclusion. We cannot allow it to become the preserve of the tiny minority who want to drive hatred in our communities." It comes after the Prime Minister criticised sports brand Nike's playful update to the St George's Cross on the New England football kit. The incident appears to have sparked a wave of flag-centred patriotism within the party, with 2 Tory MPs so far calling for a Minister of Flags to be appointed in the UK government. That article was by Ross Hunter. This is from The National on Monday, 22nd April 2024. From the News section. London Marathon. Glasgow man with cerebral palsy suspects world record. By Lucy Jackson. A Scottish man with cerebral palsy has completed the London Marathon on Sunday, raising money for 2 local charities. Andrew Tomlinson, 40, from Glasgow, capped off the 6 major marathons when he finished the London Marathon on Sunday, having already run Boston, Berlin, Chicago, New York and Tokyo. Tomlinson has hemiplegic hypertonia cerebral palsy, which means he cannot respond with his left arm or left leg. He was raising funds for the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice in Glasgow and the My Name's Doddy Foundation, which funds research into treatments for motor neurone disease. "I'm a great rugby fan. I'm a Scot and I grew up watching Doddy Weir when I was a young boy," Tomlinson said after completing the race. After running in Tokyo 3 weeks ago, Tomlinson said, "Crowds in London are far superior. It pushed me on. I probably ran a wee bit quicker than I expected to because I've not been feeling good. I reckon I'm the first person with cerebral palsy to do all 6 majors," he continued, adding, "I've also ran in under 4 hours, which I suspect may be a world record." More than 50,000 people are running the 26.2-mile course through London on Sunday, making it the largest turnout in the marathon's history. The 2023 marathon, the world's biggest annual one-day fundraising event, raised £63 million for thousands of charities. Among the famous faces who took part in the race was Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and Matt Hancock, whose appearance on Laura Kuenssberg's show on Sunday caused environmental campaigner Chris Packham to produce a hilarious reaction. That article was by Lucy Jackson. This is from The National on Monday, 22nd April 2024. From the News section. Prince Andrew seen driving special police car despite royal duties being stripped. By Lucy Jackson. Prince Andrew has been spotted driving a special Range Rover fitted with blue emergency lights, despite being stripped of his police protection. The Duke of York was suspended from royal duties over his connections to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Despite no longer being a working royal, the 64-year-old prince was seen by the Mail on Sunday using the £100,000 4x4 for horse riding trips in Windsor and lunch at Harry's Bar, a prestigious private members' club in Mayfair. He has been photographed driving the vehicle in Windsor and in central London and is often seen followed by his private protection officers in a £60,000 Land Rover Discovery. The Range Rover is assigned to Andrew and is fitted with police lights, while the Land Rover is fitted with amber hazard lights as part of a fleet leased by the royal household. It is illegal for the public to fit blue lights to their car, but all members of the royal family have a special dispensation so that the vehicles can be used for official engagements and police convoys. However, as Andrew is no longer a working royal, there are few scenarios, other than state funerals or coronations, where he or his private security team would be allowed to use the lights. It is understood that the blue lights in the Range Rover have never been switched on. Prince Andrew was stripped of his honours and taxpayer-funded armed police guards at the end of 2022, which previously cost the public up to £3 million a year. Andrew was forced to step down from royal duties in late 2019 after his disastrous BBC Newsnight interview with journalist Emily Maitlis about his relationship with Epstein. The disgraced financier had killed himself in a jail cell while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges in August that year. In 2022, Andrew paid a reported £7 million settlement to Virginia Giuffre, and later that year he was officially stripped of his royal title and his police protection. He has denied all the allegations against him. A Home Office spokesman told the Mail on Sunday, "It is our long-standing policy not to provide detailed information on protective security." A Buckingham Palace spokesman declined to comment. That article was by Lucy Jackson. This is from The National on Monday, 22nd April 2024. From the Politics section. Wet wipes containing plastic to be banned across the UK. By Ross Hunter. Wet wipes containing plastic will be banned across the UK to reduce marine litter. The supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic will be banned following overwhelming support during public consultation, with 95% of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing with the proposals. Measures have been set out in a joint response by all 4 UK nations published today, including a transition period for businesses to help them prepare. The Scottish Government said the ban continues its history of cutting down on plastic litter, including introducing a charge for carrier bags in 2014, the ban on plastic-stemmed cotton buds in 2019, and a ban on the single-use plastic food items in 2022. Scottish ministers will introduce regulations by the end of 2024, with the ban due to come into force 18 months later, although several shops have stopped selling them. Wet wipes containing plastic do not biodegrade and persist for many years, harming wildlife and the environment, and are a source of microplastic pollution. From 2015 to 2020, an average of 20 wet wipes were found per 100 metres of beach surveyed across the UK, according to DEFRA beach litter monitoring data. Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity Lorna Slater said, "I am delighted to confirm today that the Scottish Government will ban wet wipes containing plastic. These items are a problematic source of marine litter and are a threat to the health of our environment and wildlife. This ban delivers on an important commitment made in our marine litter strategy and builds on previous actions to ban unnecessary single-use plastic items such as plastic-stemmed cotton buds and plastic straws and cutlery. These policies are all proof of the progress Scotland is making toward protecting our environment and all contribute to our journey towards a circular economy." That article was by Ross Hunter.
From the National, Monday the 22nd of April, from the comment section, How this new Labour policy helps to fuel low pay, by Professor Gregor Gall. The national minimum wage became a quarter of a century old this month. It was introduced by Blair's new Labour government following its setting up of the nominally independent Low Pay Commission so that the Commission could make recommendations to the government on the levels for the minimum wage. After the Thatcher years when wage councils, which set minimum hourly pay rates in the lowest paid sectors such as retail, were abolished, the move to create a national minimum wage seemed like a good one. Blair had vowed to lift people out of poverty, especially children, and the minimum wage was one of the flagship policies by which he sought to do so. It was part of New Labour's Welfare to Work active labour market programme, where work would pay more than benefits. At the Labour conference, Blair batted back the arguments used against its introduction, saying it would not lead to job losses, inflation nor company bankruptcy. He was proved right on all three scores, but only because of the timidity of the national minimum wage. The increase, nearly 10% or above, that came into effect on April the 1st was the third highest annual uprate since the national minimum wage was created. It has led to many, such as former New Labour Minister Margaret Beckett, to pronounce it was the greatest achievement of the 1997 to 2001 Labour government and of all the Labour governments of 1997 to 2010. But, as with many things with Blairism and New Labour, it was much more than just a case of the devil being in the detail. Not only were the levels originally set too low and have continued to be so, but it was done by age groups, when the cost of living for adults did not markedly differ whether they were 16, 18, 21 or 23 years of age. All this led to the creation of the independent living wage, which is set at a higher rate than the minimum wage. In 2001, a campaign was started which was formalised in 2011 by the establishment of the Living Wage Foundation. This was added to in 2019 by the Living Hours campaign, because it had become abundantly clear that the pay rates for working part-time could not sustain a decent living. And the Tories deliberately confused the situation in 2016 by naming the minimum wage for those over 23, now 21, as the national living wage when it is no such thing. Bad as though this all was, what the national minimum wage has essentially done by setting the rates so low is to legitimise and institutionalise low pay. Employers now have a clear guide as to the minimum amount of hourly pay they can lawfully get away with. The national minimum wage was a classic piece of new labourism. While it recognised a problem created by the Tories and their neoliberal version of capitalism, it did so in a far from full-bodied way. It is a form of light-touch regulation of employers because the enforcement of it is so lax. Though there are enforcement orders, there are no penalties paid by employers unless they fail to act after already having received an enforcement order. And it was not until 2013 that the process of naming and shaming employers not paying the minimum wage began. Aggrieved workers still have to pursue employers that fail to pay the minimum wage, whereas HM Revenue and Customs could carry out spot checks to ensure employers abide by the law. Even with the minimum wage, there is more in-work poverty than ever before, with many claiming benefits in order just to try to make ends meet. This is the clearest indication that the national minimum wage is effectively to legitimise low pay by giving it a statutory underpinning. It also means that the state is effectively subsidising low-paying employers by allowing them to pay this level, which then necessitates their workers to also claim benefits. This is one of many hidden handouts to employers. It's not clear that Keir Starmer will move away from this position, despite what is in Labour's New Deal for working people. That document, largely influenced by the union, says Labour and government will change the Low Pay Commission's remit so that the minimum wage will, for the first time, reflect the need for working people's pay to at least cover the cost of living, and the national living wage will live up to its name. It also pledges to establish and properly fund a single enforcement body with extensive powers to penalise minimum wage violations. The omens do not seem good, but time will ultimately tell. And that was a comment piece by Professor Gregory Gall, who is a research associate at the University of Glasgow and author of Mick Lynch, The Making of a Working Class Hero, Manchester University Press 2024. From the National, Monday the 22nd of April, from the comment section. I've been detained for protesting against arms sales. I have no regrets. By Stuart Bretherton, Palestine Action. Scotland, the place I call home, is also home to the arms industry central to the destruction of the Palestinian homeland. Seeing my homeland playing a role in the dispossession of others from theirs is what made me become active, joining solidarity protests, signing petitions and finding out other ways to apply pressure. For a while, it made me feel better, but despite years of work and thousands of people being involved, none of it was making a tangible impact. I was still living among weapons manufacturers such as Thales, Raytheon and Leonardo, profiting from arming the occupation of Palestine. Witnessing Palestine Action's relentless direct action against weapons factories in England inspired me to step up my solidarity. I saw people scale factory roofs, blockade gates and put their bodies on the line to disrupt this murderous trade. They too were done with the traditional campaigning tactics, tried and failed time and again. While the violence being used against Palestinians escalated, Palestine Action took matters into its hands. It was time to bring this movement to Scotland. At dawn on June the 1st, 2022, I found myself, alongside 4 others, climbing up the Thales factory in Govan, Glasgow. Thales manufactures armoured vehicles, missile systems and more, and, importantly, partners with Israel's largest weapons firm, Elbit Systems, on the Watchkeeper drone project. Under this project, Thales and Elbit jointly own UAV tactical systems in Leicester, which regularly exports drone technologies to Israel. The Watchkeeper drone was modelled on Elbit's Hermes 450 and was used by the British Army in Afghanistan. It is now used to surveil the English Channel for those seeking refuge. The similarity of the models allows UAV tactical systems to produce parts for both the British and Israeli versions of the military drone, while Thales is also integrated to the production of F-35 fighters. On our way to the factory, and onto its roof, we were bonded together by our determination to launch a movement to end Scotland's weapons trade with Israel. Overcoming any nerves, and rocked with adrenaline, we had to bypass security and climb up the 6-metre long ladder on the side of the building. Once we were at the top and saw workers evacuate the building, we knew we had done it. We shut Tails down. After 14 hours, I was taken down by the police and held in cells for another 14 hours. I felt no regrets. The factory was forced to close for that day and its operations diminished in the days after. That was the immediate impact. But the long-term impact can only be seen when you look across all of what Palestine Action does. The cumulative result of efforts against the war machine. It wasn't long before the next group of activists from Palestine Action Scotland took the same journey as us, themselves scaling the same roof to shut down Tails. In January the next year, the group set its sights on Leonardo's Edinburgh factory, a plant which produces high-energy military lasers for Israel's F-35 jets. With hammers to hand and fire extinguishers filled with red paint, just 3 people managed to shut down a factory with 1,800 workers. And these are just a few of the actions under Palestine Action umbrella, a campaign which has seen hundreds of targets struck in locations spanning continents. While taking direct action is not without its personal sacrifices, being held in a cell, facing trial, or potential imprisonment, it's incomparable to what Palestinians face daily. If Palestinians could shut down the factories of Elbit, Tails, Leonardo and other complicit companies, then they would. These factories are in the West because Israel assumes its industry will be safe here, so far away from its victims. That gives us an opportunity to contribute to Palestinians' resistance in places where they aren't able to resist. With the scale of brutality that Palestinians live under, that opportunity becomes an obligation. The highest court in the world has ruled on the risk of genocide in Gaza and warned of the consequences for those failing to prevent it. By arming Israel, Scotland has to answer for what is done. If our politicians fail to act, then shutting Tails, Elbit, Leonardo and others down is the correct course of action. It took only a few of us to show that this can be done. If we had just a fraction of those who take to the streets to protest, then we would be able to put an end to Scottish complicity in Palestine's oppression. And that was a comment piece by Stuart Bretherton of Palestine Action. From the National, Tuesday the 23rd of April, from the news section, DWP warned over plans to snoop on benefit claimants' bank accounts. Article written by Seth Braun. The Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, has been warned about its plans to snoop on bank accounts to combat fraud, with MPs stressing that it risks replicating the Horizon scandal. The Data Protection and Digital Information Bill is set to compel banks and building societies to give the DWP data to search for fraud and error in the benefits system. But in a letter to Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride and Innovation Secretary Michelle Donlan, MPs have expressed deep concern the move could reverse the well-established presumption of innocence. Conservative MPs Marcus Fish and Charles Walker were among those who signed the letter, alongside Scottish Lib Dem MP Wendy Chamberlain and Green Party welfare spokesperson Catherine Rowett. It was also signed by Labour MPs Ian Byrne, Richard Burgon, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Zara Sultana, Debbie Abrahams, Kim Johnson, Bel Ribeiro Ade, Sam Tarry and Mick Whiteley, as well as MP Diane Abbott, who has had the Labour whip removed. A number of peers were also signatories of the letter. The letter said, "While we are sure this is not your intention, the broad and far-reaching nature of these powers would be highly intrusive. Issuing an account information notice would require banks to sift through tens of millions of bank accounts in order to identify people in the welfare system, around 40% of the population, in pursuit of indicators of fraud or error. Searching for such signals without reasonable grounds for suspicion would reverse the well-established presumption of innocence. Indeed, anyone in receipt of welfare payments would automatically be subject to intrusive financial scrutiny solely due to their benefit status. There is a real risk that such efforts to fight fraud will come very much at the expense of the poor, the disabled and the elderly. The bill is currently in committee stage in the House of Lords, where it has faced extensive criticism." Speaking at the debate, Baroness Kidron said, I cannot work out for the life of me if these measures are intended to hurt, or if a focus on the shiny prospect of AI to sort out DWT problems led incrementally to this place. If the bill were to pass, the DWP would be able to request details around benefit claimants and any connected bank accounts. These could include those of landlords, family members, partners or ex-partners. Campaign Big Brother Watch, backed by more than 40 charities and organisations, recently wrote to Stride to warn that the plans risked repeating mistakes made in the post office scandal. The letter from MPs added, "We note the tragic events of the Horizon scandal in which innocent people suffered wrongful prosecutions, financial ruin and reputational damage following data used from faulty software and algorithmic systems. We cannot condone powers that risk replicating this disaster on a much broader scale with vulnerable people, many of whom live on the poverty line." And that article was by Steph Braun. From the National, Tuesday the 23rd of April, from the news section, juryless rape trials pass Holyrood vote, but some SNP MSPs abstain. Article written by Xander Elliards. Almost half of all MSPs at Holyrood, including some prominent SNP backbenchers, have declined to back controversial justice reforms brought forward by the Scottish Government. A total of 62 MSPs abstained on a vote on the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill, more than the 60 MSPs who voted in support. However, not one MSP voted against the legislation as it passed its first hurdle at Holyrood. SNP MSPs Kate Forbes, Annabel Ewing, Fergus Ewing, Christine Graham, Ivan McKee and Michelle Thompson joined Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats by abstaining. It came after a debate which opposition MPs said the legislation, which would scrap Scotland's unique, not proven verdict but could also bring in judge-only juryless trials for those accused of rape, was experimental, perhaps even dangerously so. Well, Justice Secretary Angela Constance said action was needed to tackle low conviction rates for rape and other sexual offences. Scottish Conservative Justice spokesperson Russell Finlay criticised plans to pilot juryless trials for those accused of rape and attempted rape. Constance said transformational change was needed in Scotland's justice system. She told MSPs, "I believe the case for change is clear. I believe the time for change is now. It is incumbent on us to work together to deliver the justice system that our society needs and deserves." On plans to end the requirement for juries of rape and attempted rape trials, she said the pilot would be focused on cases with just one alleged offence and one accused person. In such cases, she said the average 5-year-old conviction rate was just 24%. While she said she would reflect on the differences of opinion, Constance went on, "It is clear our justice system needs to change the way in which it responds to serious sexual offending. As legislators, it is our role to determine the legal frameworks that ought to be in place, and no part of our justice system should be exempt from review and, if necessary, reconsideration." The Justice Secretary also told MSPs a pilot of juryless trials would provide much needed evidence to let us have a properly informed debate on an enduring issue that undermines confidence in our criminal justice system. Tory MSP Findlay said, "The government appears to be experimenting in much the same way as a mad scientist at work." He told MSPs a move to put those accused of rape and attempted rape on trial before a judge alone would be a departure from the long-established right of a person accused of serious crime to trial by a jury of their peers. Describing juries as the cornerstone of the justice system, Finlay said, "There is insufficient evidence to justify what would amount to an experiment with people's lives." He also said Scottish ministers cannot wish away threats from lawyers to boycott such a scheme. Labour's Polly McNeill said her party too was opposed to the plans for juryless rape trials. Meanwhile, with the legislation containing a number of proposed reforms, ranging from the introduction of a victims commissioner to a legal right to lifelong anonymity for victims of sexual offences, both Labour and the Tories said the bill was frankly far too big. McNeill said, "Scottish Labour supports the government's aims that it is time for change, but we believe that they need a comprehensive plan to look separately at each reform contained within the bill. We believe there is too much substantial reform in one bill. And that article was written by Xander Ellards. From the National, Tuesday the 23rd of April, from the news section, new honours for royal family branded slap in the face. Article written by Steph Braun. New honours that have been handed out to the royal family have been slated as an act of breathtaking nepotism. Queen Camilla and the Prince and Princess of Wales have all received honours, with William becoming the Grand Master of the Order of Bath. Kate Middleton is the first royal to be named a Companion of Honour, which is awarded for having a major contribution to the arts, science, medicine or government lasting over a long period of time. Other recipients of this have been Shirley Bassey and Elton John. The Queen, meanwhile, becomes the Grand Master of the Order of the British Empire, once held by Prince Philip, and head of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, set up in 1917 to honour a broader cross-section of civilian and military recipients. Graham Smith, CEO of anti-monarchy group Republic, said the pointless medals were a slap in the face for all the hard-working people who get awarded MBEs, OBEs and CBEs. He added, "The royals do very little in return for a huge reward, but that's never enough. Instead, we see our head of state handing out trinkets and medals to his own family in an act of breathtaking nepotism." The appointments are traditionally announced on St George's Day. Last year, Republicans hit out when King Charles bestowed Scotland's highest honour upon his wife Camilla, as the move was branded cronyism with a crown on top. Camilla was brought into the Order of the Thistle in June, an honour dating back to at least 1687 that recognises Scottish men and women who have held public office or who have contributed in a particular way to national life. William is also in the order, as is Princess Anne. Appointments are made entirely at the whim of the King. And that article was written by Steph Braun and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the National, Tuesday the 23rd of April, from the news section, Scottish Winter Benefit pays out more than £30 million for energy costs, by Alistair Ferguson. More than £30 million was allocated to help Scottish households tackle increased energy costs this winter, official figures showed. Data from the Scottish Government showed the winter heating payment, WHP, which supports low-income households, the elderly and disabled people, paid out £23 million to vulnerable Scottish people. The WHP scheme made 417,885 payments of £55.05 between November 2023 and the end of March 2024. A separate winter benefit to help families of the most severely disabled children and young people paid £7.2 million, with 30,400 payments of £235.70 made throughout the winter period. Shirley Ann Somerville, Social Justice Secretary, said the benefit guarantees payments every year, in contrast to the UK Government's cold weather payment, which was replaced by the Scottish Government Ministers in 2023. The UK benefit allocates funding where the temperature drops to 0 degrees or below over 7 consecutive days. Statistics also showed more than 99% of winter heating benefits had been issued by the end of February, while the Child-Specific Fund showed 98% were made in November. Somerville said, "The £30.2 million paid over the course of winter provides support to those who need it most. It has been paid quickly and effectively to help mitigate the worst of the cost of living crisis. Winter heating payment guarantees those who qualify will get a payment every year, in contrast to the UK Government approach, which needs the weather to be under a certain temperature for a sustained spell." She said the benefits increase with inflation, adding, "I am pleased we're getting the vast majority of these payments to people in good time." And that article was written by Alistair Ferguson.
The National, recorded on Tuesday 23rd of April 2024. The Culture section. Exclusive. Famed folk band Capper Cayley team up with orchestra for busy schedule. By Nan Sport, journalist. When they first came together at Oban High School, the founding members of Capercaillie had no idea that they could make a living from their passion for music. 4 decades later, the band is not only still going strong, but is widely credited for bringing Gaelic music to the world stage and helping to inspire the resurgence in trad that is evident today. Their worldwide musical journey has taken them from the Brazilian rainforest to the hanging gardens of Babylon as well as the pop charts, and now they're marking another first with an album of new symphonic arrangements recorded with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, SSO. Founding member Donald Shaw told the Sunday National that the album had been a long time coming. It's always been an ambition to work with an orchestra within traditional music, and to do it with a world-class orchestra is fantastic, he said. It's been an incredible experience spending time with the BBC SSO and hearing our music come alive with the power and eloquence of their players. Shaw said the collaboration was a natural development as the great symphonic composers of the last few hundred years were influenced by folk melodies, including Beethoven, who arranged Gaelic songs. Comprising favourite material from their wide repertoire, Reloved includes walking songs collected from the Hebrides such as High Rimbo and Mila Maravishk, groove-infused instrumentals, modern ballads such as Manus Looney's Servant to the Slave, and love songs like Ian Glein Cuich. They feature lead singer Karen Matheson, once famously hailed by Sean Connery as possessing a throat touched by God. Since the band's first innovative recordings, they've played in more than 40 countries, released 10 award-winning albums, notched up more than 1 million sales worldwide, performed and appeared in the film Rob Roy. Despite the success, Shaw is modest about the band's contribution to the resurgence and popularity of Scottish folk music. I think her popularity in the early 1990s onwards probably coincided with a change of attitude and atmosphere for traditional music in Scotland, with a younger audience coming through, he said. It was a change from when Capercaillie first formed in 1984, when only a handful of trad bands like the Boys of the Loch made a living from playing full-time. 40 years ago, you were lucky if you saw something in Hogmanay, and that was it really, said Shaw. We just played locally and never thought much of it, and even when we did get a bit of success and started playing bigger concerts, it was still kind of crazy to think you might make a living out of it. A soundtrack for a 1988 Channel 4 documentary series on emigration, called The Blood is Strong, drew more attention to the band, however. That certainly took us to a wider audience, and showed we were experimenting with more than jigs and reels, said Shaw. Capercaillie's major label debut, 1991's Delirium, was a watershed release on many levels, being in a major label for a start, plus featuring the band's first original songs in English, and introducing percussion to their sound, but above all for the track Coishe Charoon, a funked-up 400-year-old walking song, which went on to become the UK's first ever Gaelic top 40 hit. More attention came when they featured in the 1995 Hollywood movie Rob Roy, starring Liam Neeson and Jessica Lange. That and the release of Braveheart saw a renewed interest in Scottish history and culture, which possibly contributed to Capercaillie's rise. I remember in 1996 we did a gig in Shepherd's Bush in London, and it was the first time I saw faces in the audience painted with the St Andrews flag a la Mel Gibson, laughed Shaw. He said highlights over the past 40 years included filming Rob Roy and playing in many of the big old European theatres. That was back in the day when it was easier to travel. It's a nightmare since Brexit, said Shaw. Despite Brexit complications, fans will be pleased to know that performances in Denmark, France and Spain are planned to mark the new album's release next month, and the band will also play at Cambridge Folk Festival. Before that, they will appear in May 1 at the Glasgow Gig for Gaza, with headliners Deacon Blue to raise money for medical aid for Palestinians. Reloved will be released in double vinyl on May 10 and streaming platforms on May 31. By Nan Sport, The National, recorded on Wednesday 24th of April 2024. The Culture section. Project to dry out Charles Rennie Mackintosh's Hill House moves forward. By Ross Hunter, multimedia journalist. A project to dry out Charles Rennie Mackintosh masterpiece The Hill House is working and has reached a really exciting stage, experts have said. A giant steel box was built around the property in Helensburgh in 2019 to protect its saturated walls from further damage from the elements, and enable it to gradually dry out as the first stage in a long-term conservation programme. The Hill House has been badly affected by the driving rain of Scotland's west coast since its construction in 1904, and water penetration was damaging both the structure of the house and the bespoke interior decoration. The National Trust for Scotland, NTS, which cares for the property, said samples taken from the outside of the house in late 2023 have shown the structure is drying out as planned. From April 29 to May 3, conservation experts will take samples from the interior of the building to build up understanding of the water damage and how much this has been reversed by the protection of the box. Project Director Elizabeth Davidson said, "We're at a really exciting stage in our work at the Hill House. The box has been doing its dual job of preventing further water from impacting on the building and also allowing the structure, which in some places was very wet indeed, to dry out gradually. We've been closely monitoring this process, and this sampling helps us gain more insight into how the building is responding to the drying process. Relative humidity in the house is now down to acceptable conservation standards, a remarkable achievement given the very visible areas of rain penetration previously through micro-cracking in the structure. A series of samples will be taken from key internal points in the house which have been badly affected by water ingress: the living room, dining room, drawing room, guest bedroom, wine room and larder. These will provide conservators with more information about how the building has been affected by water and if there was any inherent defect in either the materials used originally or the manner in which they were used in construction. NTS said this will help inform future decisions about the conservation works needed to repair and restore the building, which is now one of the few remaining Macintosh creations open to the public. At the same time, the charity will reopen all the chimneys and fireplaces to encourage airflow around the building and continue the drying process. The house in the Argyll and Bute town will be closed to visitors while this work is underway. However, the walkways, cafe, shop and garden will remain open. Once analysis of the sampling is complete, the next major milestone in the Hill House project will be the complete removal of the external concrete render in the building, which is planned for late 2024. Ian McClelland, NTS Regional Director for the South and West, said, "This project gives visitors a great insight into the detailed and technical work needed to care for the Hill House, a place of international importance and one of Macintosh's finest." The house was commissioned by Glasgow book publisher Walter Blackie, and the interior design of the house was a collaboration between Macintosh and his wife Margaret MacDonald. In January this year, Macintosh at the Willow, the Macintosh designed tea rooms in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, joined the portfolio of properties cared for by NTS. By Ross Hunter.
The National Politics on Wednesday, the 24th of April. First Minister slams Rwanda bill as morally repugnant after channel deaths. A front-page article written by Adam Robertson. Hamza Yusuf described the UK government's newly passed Rwanda bill as unworkable and morally repugnant after 5 people died just hours after its passage. Following a late sitting of Parliament and a wrangle between the Commons and the House of Lords, the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill was passed into law on Monday night, deeming the African country an appropriate place to send some asylum seekers. The Prime Minister said earlier this week that the first charter planes are expected to leave in 10 to 12 weeks, with multiple flights a month due. Mr Yusuf told journalists he would hope to resist attempts for planes to take off from Scottish airfields, although it is not clear if this is likely. Speaking at the opening of a new JP Morgan office in Glasgow, he hit out at the policy. "It's unworkable and it's morally repugnant," he said. "It's a further demonstration of how the values of Westminster are not Scotland's values." He was speaking after several senior United Nations figures urged Rishi Sunak to reconsider. Mr Yusuf went on to say that the deaths of 3 men, a woman and a girl during a crossing of the Channel yesterday shows what we need is not unworkable legislation like the Rwanda bill. He added, "What you need to do is to create safe, legal routes for migration, and that hopefully deters the illegal migration that none of us of any political party wants to see." Asked how he would react to the use of airstrips north of the border to take asylum seekers to Rwanda, the First Minister said, "I would hope to resist that if it was possible to do so. We should be a country, as we have been for not just years but for decades, that ensures that we give sanctuary to those who are fleeing persecution, war and extreme poverty. He said that the UK has benefited from migration for many, many years. However, speaking to journalists as he made his way to Poland, Mr Sunak said the tragedy in the Channel shows the need for a deterrent to stop people attempting the treacherous crossings. He said, "We want to prevent people making these very dangerous crossings. If you look at what's happening, criminal gangs are exploiting vulnerable people. They are packing more and more people into these unseaworthy dinghies. We've seen an enormous increase in the numbers per boat over the past few years. This is what tragically happens when they push people out to sea, and that's why, for matters of compassion more than anything else, we must actually break this business model and end this unfairness of people coming to our country illegally." Meanwhile, speaking after the Rwanda bill had passed, Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, said, "The new legislation marks a further step away from the United Kingdom's long tradition of providing refuge to those in need, in breach of the Refugee Convention. Protecting refugees requires all countries, not just those neighbouring crisis zones, to uphold their obligations. This arrangement seeks to shift responsibility for refugee protection, undermining international cooperation and setting a worrying global precedent." And Volker Turk, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, also called on the Prime Minister to reconsider. He said, by shifting responsibility for refugees, reducing the United Kingdom's court's ability to scrutinise removal decisions, restricting access to legal remedies in the United Kingdom and limiting the scope of domestic and international human rights protections for a specific group of people, this new legislation seriously hinders the rule of law in the United Kingdom and sets a perilous precedent globally. And an open letter to the Prime Minister has been signed by more than 250 organisations from across civil society in the UK. Oxfam GB, Human Rights Watch and the Refugee Council are among those to sign the letter, which describes the new legislation as a shameful and performatively cruel law that will risk people's lives. James Wilson, Director of Signatory Detention Action, said, "With this act, this government has turned its back on reality, as well as on our responsibility to protect refugees." A front-page article written by Adam Robertson. The National News on Wednesday the 24th of April. Fresh plan announced to support islands over higher costs. An article written by Steph Braun. The Scottish Government will strive to help islanders struggling with the higher costs resulting from living away from the mainland, the Deputy First Minister has pledged. Shona Robison made the commitment as she announced that a new strategic plan for the islands would be published in 2025. Speaking ahead of a visit to the island of Lewis today, the Deputy First Minister promised that the government would continue to work closely with communities to co-develop and co-deliver policies that address islanders' priorities. She added that while the first National Islands Plan, which was published in 2018, had been comprehensive and ambitious, those living on the islands had told us that more needs to be done. Ms Robison said, "We know that island communities face issues such as higher living costs than those in other areas, and the new plan will ensure that we continue to do our best to support them to address these challenges while drawing on their considerable expertise and strengths." More than £12 million has been spent on critical infrastructure projects on Scotland's islands in the last 3 years, the Deputy First Minister added. She also told how the £50 million Islands Growth Deal, which involves investment from both the UK and Scottish governments, would help bring about sustainable and inclusive economic growth in Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. Ms Robison also cited initiatives such as the Carbon Neutral Islands Project, which is working to help 6 islands to become carbon neutral by 2040, as being vital to delivering our vision for thriving, sustainable and successful island communities. An article written by Steph Braun. The National News on Wednesday the 24th of April. Police confident that murder will be solved. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Police have said they are confident they will catch whoever killed a dog walker shot more than 2 months ago in Perthshire as the murder inquiry continues. Officers have visited 478 properties and interviewed more than 800 people as they investigate the murder of Brian Lowe in February. Mr. Lowe, who was 65, had been walking his dog and was found dead on a remote track in Pitilly near Aberfeldy at around 8:30 a.m. on Saturday, February the 17th, with his black Labrador being found safe by his side. His death was initially treated as medical or non-suspicious. However, concerns around the wound he had suffered were raised on February the 21st during an initial medical examination, and the police major investigation team was called in. A full post-mortem examination on February the 23rd established that Mr. Lowe had sustained a fatal gunshot, and a murder inquiry was launched. Detective Superintendent Lorna Ferguson, who is leading the investigation, said, "We are keeping an open mind. There's obviously quite an extensive inquiry. We've got a lot of work that we've done, we've got a lot of work ongoing, and we're speaking to locals in the village as well." Superintendent Ferguson of the Major Investigation Team added, "I believe the answer lies in the community. Someone out there knows who has done this, and they need to come forward." Asked whether she is confident that police will catch whoever killed Mr. Lowe, she replied yes. She added, "Brian's family are still coming to terms with what has happened and continue to be supported by specialist officers. They wish their privacy to be respected. Finding who did this is paramount. If you know anything that could help, please do the right thing and speak to police." Mr. Lowe died from gunshot wounds to the chest and neck, according to his death certificate. Detectives were carrying out further door-to-door inquiries in Aberfeldy yesterday as officers tried to piece together what happened. They've also identified more than 2,400 hours of CCTV footage from the area, which is currently being examined as part of the investigation known as Operation New Lane. More than 30 officers are involved in the inquiry. Superintendent Ferguson said officers remain in the area to reassure the community. She said Aberfeldy is a safe place to live and work. These incidents are thankfully very rare. I would say to anyone who has information to contact us. We have spoken to quite a number of people, but anyone who hasn't spoken to us or has information can come forward and speak to the inquiry team. The Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, Scotland's police watchdog, is currently investigating the circumstances surrounding the death in the wake of the delay in treating the death as murder. Detectives previously admitted that evidence may have been lost amid the delay in setting up a crime scene cordon, which did not happen until 4 days after Mr. Lowe's body was discovered. An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National News on Wednesday, the 24th of April. Trade union chief tells inquiry that social care sector was already in crisis before the pandemic. An article written by Gregor Young. The social care sector was underprepared for the COVID-19 pandemic as it was already in crisis, an inquiry has heard. Ros Foyer, the General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, told the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry that funding cuts and changes to migration rules had left the care sector understaffed and under-resourced going into the pandemic, resulting in a perfect storm when it hit. She said that as a result, the care sector went into the pandemic without a plan for dealing with it and with insufficient stockpiles of PPE, something that she said amounted to a failure by government to protect frontline staff. Ms Foyer also described a burnout pandemic that saw many staff leave the care profession after being left feeling abandoned while trying to care for vulnerable people in very difficult circumstances. She told the inquiry, too many workers across our health and social care sectors were placed at really high levels of risk, and it needs to be understood and investigated by this inquiry that a lot of those risks could have been avoided if proper planning, PPE and guidance had been in place. As far as we're concerned, our governments, both at UK and Scotland level, really failed on that particular point, and that had a devastating impact on the outcome. She pointed to research showing that health and social care workers were 4 times more likely to contract the virus than the average worker, and that they were on average more likely to die of the illness. These workers placed themselves in some cases in lethal danger in service to their communities. We feel that action needs to be taken now to make sure that those that are facing long COVID and those that have passed away as a result of their exposure to COVID are receiving meaningful state support. Stuart Gale, KC, co-lead counsel to the inquiry, asked her about part of her written statement concerning the impact of austerity on the preparedness of the sector, saying, "You raise the issue of austerity and indicate that that was an issue impacting on the social care sector as a public service, which was already in crisis pre-pandemic." Ms Foyer replied, "It was of no surprise to us that much of the preparation wasn't there, given the overstretched nature of staffing levels right across various parts of health and social care, and the cuts that had been made. There was already a recruitment crisis in social care, for example, before we entered the pandemic." She added that the sector remained undervalued, saying, "You can go and get a job in a supermarket and earn more money than you can doing the highly skilled work involved in being a social care worker." STUC Deputy General Secretary Dave Moxham echoed this in his evidence, telling the inquiry that many care staff went to work despite falling ill with COVID-19 because they simply could not afford not to. He said some of it might have been down to the undoubted dedication of health and social care workers, in this case probably misplaced, but largely speaking it was economic. People simply couldn't afford not to go to their work. We heard that frequently. It was sometimes really quite distressing to have to tell people that our absolute advice was that they shouldn't go into work when we knew that that was causing them enormous concerns in terms of their income. Ms Foyer also praised the level of engagement between the Scottish Government and the trade unions during the pandemic. She pointed to differences in areas like social distancing, adding, "Arguably more stringent measures than happened south of the border at UK level, and we believe that that would save lives." An article written by Gregor Young. The National News on Wednesday, the 24th of April. 2 men airlifted to hospital after a plane crash near Prestwick Airport. An article written by Adam Robertson and read by Howell. 2 men had to be airlifted to hospital with serious injuries after a small aircraft crashed near a South Ayrshire village. Just after 4 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, emergency services were called to Ladykirk House in Moncton, where a small aircraft had crashed. It's less than 2 miles from Prestwick Airport. His Majesty's Coast Guard said it airlifted the 2 men to Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow, while the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service sent 2 pumps and 2 specialist appliances to the scene before leaving at 7:10 p.m. A Scottish Fire and Rescue Service spokesman added, "We were alerted at 4:05 p.m. to reports of a small aircraft crash. We are no longer in attendance. The last appliance remained on scene until 7:10 p.m. A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "Around 4:10 p.m. on Tuesday the 23rd of April, we received a report of a small aircraft having crashed in a field near to the A719 at Moncton. Emergency services attended and 2 men aged 65 and 75 were taken to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital by helicopter for treatment to serious injuries. The A719 was closed at the B739 at Moncton and reopened around 7:30 p.m. Inquiries are ongoing to establish the full circumstances of the accident." An article written by Adam Robertson.
The National, Thursday the 25th of April, from the news section. Humza Yousaf ends SNP's power sharing deal with Scottish Greens. Humza Yousaf has sacked Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater as ministers, turfing the Scottish Greens out of government. The First Minister summoned the 2 Green co-leaders to Bute House on Thursday morning, ahead of an emergency cabinet meeting. It has been reported he dismissed them from their posts and they left the building before the cabinet meeting began. It appears Yousaf's hand was forced, as Scottish Green members considered whether they wanted to stay in government after a series of policy disagreements with the SNP, drawing a line under less than 2 years of the Scottish Greens' involvement in government. That was an article by Hamish Morrison. The National, Thursday the 25th of April, from the news section. Mary Black takes on Tories over mass graves in Palestine. The UK government has insisted Israel can be trusted not to commit war crimes, despite evidence emerging of mass graves in Gaza. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden, filling in for Rishi Sunak, who is in Berlin, called Israel's bombardment of Palestine since October the 7th a legitimate war of self-defence in the face of mounting concern over its conduct. SNP Deputy Westminster Leader Mary Black said the discovery of more than 300 bodies in a mass grave outside the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis was evidence of Israeli war crimes. Others were found outside the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Black said the discovery was on par with the discovery of mass graves in Ukraine in the early days of the Russian invasion. She said, 2 years ago, when mass graves were discovered in Ukraine, this House united in condemnation and rightly treated these graves as evidence of war crimes, which Russia must be made to answer for. Yesterday, Palestinian officials uncovered 2 mass graves outside the bombed hospitals in Gaza. These graves also constitute a war crime, don't they? Dowden said, well, of course, we would expect the democratic government of Israel to investigate any allegations of misconduct, and that's exactly what they do, and it's exactly what the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister urged them to do. But I find it quite extraordinary that she seeks to draw parallels between the legitimate war of self-defence of Israel and the conduct of Russia. Black hit back, pointing to reports that the dead included the elderly and the injured, and said some had been stripped naked, mutilated, with their hands tied behind their backs. She added, the UK's own arms policy states that if there is even a risk that war crimes may take place, then that is a reason to halt the sale of arms. Given all we know, why then is the Prime Minister yet to do so? Dowden said, well, we continue to urge the Israeli government to investigate any allegations of misconduct. The difference, though, is that we can trust the Israeli government, a democratically elected government, to properly investigate these things, and, of course, we keep the advice under review. The Foreign Secretary has recently made it clear that he has conducted a determination and has not changed his advice regarding export licences, and I think that is the correct decision. On Twitter, Green MP Caroline Lucas said Dowden's response was not good enough. She said, there is serious and credible evidence that the Israeli government is breaking international law. UK government has admitted in court it's got no response from Israeli government to questions it's asked about it, yet just now at PMQs, Dowden basically says we just need to trust them, not good enough. Israel has denied allegations it buried people in mass graves, saying instead soldiers had found and examined bodies to check whether any Israeli hostages were among the dead. The Hamas-run government of Gaza accused Israel of digging the graves to hide its crimes, and the UN has said it is investigating claims some of the dead had been bound and stripped. An Israeli Defence Force spokesperson said, misinformation is circulating regarding a mass grave that was discovered at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The grave in question was dug by Gazans a few months ago. In a post on Twitter, the IDF referred to a video which appeared to show Palestinians digging a mass grave outside the hospital. The spokesperson said, any attempt to blame Israel for burying civilians in mass graves is categorically false and a mere example of a disinformation campaign aimed at delegitimising Israel. During PMQs, Angela Rayner, who was standing in for Keir Starmer, labelled Sunak a pint-sized loser, after urging the Conservatives to stop obsessing about her living arrangements. Dowden countered by suggesting the Right Honourable landlady should step down, adding that Rayner might start claiming the House of Commons as her principal residence if the pair were required to deputise again at PM's questions. Rayner has faced scrutiny about whether she paid the right amount of tax on the 2015 sale of her Stockport council house, because of confusion over whether it was her principal residence. That was an article by Hamish Morrison. The National, Thursday the 25th of April, from the news section. Police Scotland manhunt as criminal escapes from custody in Edinburgh. Scottish police have launched a manhunt after a convicted prisoner gave guards a slip while he attended a funeral. Jamie Ross, 29, was last seen in Edinburgh on Tuesday at about 12:28 p.m. near the Cameron Toll shopping centre. According to police, Ross has connections across Edinburgh and in Aberdeen. Police have told people not to approach him, but instead contact them immediately to help trace him. He has been described by police as white, 5'9", with dark hair and bushy eyebrows, blue eyes, and a tattoo of the word Dad on his right hand. He was last seen wearing a black puffer jacket, dark trousers, and grey trainers. Chief Inspector Mark Hamilton of Police Scotland said, extensive inquiries are ongoing to trace Jamie with support from specialist officers. While Jamie is believed to have connections to the south of Edinburgh, we are keeping an open mind regarding his whereabouts at this time and would urge anyone with information to please get in touch. Anyone who sees a man matching Jamie's description is advised not to approach him, but to instead contact Police Scotland urgently on 101, quoting incident number 1458 of Tuesday, April 23rd. A spokesperson for Prisoner Transformation Services, GEO Amy, added, "Our officers recognise the emotional significance of events such as funerals and try to show compassion and understanding whilst escorting persons in custody. It is therefore disappointing when this is abused and used as an opportunity to evade detention. The Scottish Prison Service says it cannot comment on individual cases, but says it is working with police to trace his whereabouts." A spokesperson said, "We can confirm that this individual is currently unlawfully at large. We are working with Police Scotland to return him to custody." That was an article by Gregor Young.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and tell your friends about our service.